It isn't grief for something taken from you by circumstance, an illness, a market crash, a door slammed shut by someone else's decision. It's grief for something you chose to set down yourself, a decision that the version of you who still wants this thing, still believes in it, still checks the door every morning to see if it's opened, is no longer the version of you allowed to keep making the decisions. That specific grief has almost no cultural script. There's no ritual for it. No accepted language, nothing that tells you how long it's supposed to last or what it's supposed to feel like along the way. Mostly what you get instead is a culture that treats the entire category as a moral failure and calls it giving up. Giving up versus disengaging. It's worth separating those two things immediately because they get treated as synonyms, and they aren't. Giving up, in the colloquial, shame-loaded sense the phrase usually carries, implies a collapse of will, a failure of character, quitting when you should have pushed through. It's a framing that assumes always that continuing was the correct move, and that stopping requires an excuse. Psychologists Carsten Wrosch and Michael Scheier, along with their collaborators, have spent decades researching a process they call goal disengagement. And their work treats this as something entirely different from the colloquial version, something closer to a skill than a failure. Their research, conducted across multiple studies, including work with parents of children with cancer, navigating some of the most painful, unattainable goals imaginable, found that the capacity to disengage from a goal that has genuinely become unreachable is consistently associated with better subjective well-being. And in later studies, with better physical health outcomes, including more normal patterns of cortisol regulation. People who struggled to disengage from unattainable goals, by contrast, showed higher rates of depressive symptoms and anxiety, according to Wrosch and colleagues. Subsequent research using their goal adjustment scale. This is worth stating plainly because it inverts the entire cultural assumption this video opened with. The research doesn't find that people who let go of unreachable goals are worse off, weaker, or more prone to regret than people who hold on indefinitely. It finds close to the opposite. The capacity to disengage cleanly from something that has become genuinely unattainable is one of the more robust predictors of psychological and physical well-being across this entire body of research, precisely because holding on to something unreachable has documented costs of its own, in prolonged distress, in resources continually poured into a goal that isn't moving, in the specific psychological toll of chronic unresolved striving, the part the research doesn't let you skip. None of this means disengagement is painless, or that the research is offering a shortcut around the difficulty. Wrosch and Scheier's framework is explicit that disengagement alone isn't sufficient for well-being. Their studies found the real benefit comes from the combination of two separate processes, disengaging from the unattainable goal and re-engaging with a new one. Disengagement without re-engagement, the research found, doesn't reliably produce the same well-being benefits. It's the redirection of that energy towards something else meaningful, not simply the release of the old goal into a vacuum that the data actually supports. This matters because it explains why the popular version of don't give up advice gets the entire mechanism backward, and also why simply gritting your teeth and letting go isn't the whole solution either. The goal was never just an item on a list. It was, for however many years you held it, organizing a meaningful share of your attention, your identity, your sense of a future worth working toward. Removing it without anything to redirect that structure toward doesn't produce relief. It produces a vacancy, and a vacancy is not the same thing as peace. Here's the piece that explains why this particular kind of loss feels so specifically disorienting. Different in texture from other kinds of grief, even though nothing external has actually been taken from you. Psychologists Hazel Markus and Paula Nurius developed the concept of possible selves, describing the versions of yourself that exist in your imagination, the self you hope to become, the self you're afraid of becoming, the self you're actively working toward through your present choices. Their research treats these possible selves as genuinely functional psychological structures, not idle daydreams, but active components of identity that shape motivation, guide behavior, and provide a felt sense of direction in the present. A long-held dream is, in this framework, a possible self you've been building toward for years, sometimes decades. an imagined future version of you who did the thing, who has the life that came from doing it. When you make the decision to let the dream go, what you're actually grieving isn't a project or an outcome sitting somewhere out in the future. You're grieving that specific possible self, directly, the way you'd grieve a person. Because in a real structural sense, that's what it functioned as. The dream wasn't just a goal you were pursuing, it was a version of you that existed vividly in your own imagination, shaping decisions in the present. And choosing to let the goal go means that version of you stops being someone you're still becoming and starts being someone you no longer will. This is precisely why the loss doesn't respond to the usual reassurances offered for other kinds of disappointment. It isn't comforted by, there'll be other opportunities, because the grief isn't really about the opportunity. It's about a specific imagined future self, one you'd spent years getting to know, who is no longer going to exist. That's a real loss, structurally similar to other forms of grief, and it deserves to be treated as one, rather than minimized as mere disappointment about a missed goal. Why the culture offers no script. It's worth naming directly why this specific grief goes so chronically unacknowledged, because the reason isn't incidental. Cultural narratives around persistence, don't give up, chase your dreams, quitters never win, are built almost entirely around the assumption that continued effort is always the virtuous path, and that stopping requires justification, usually in the form of an external excuse. Injury, finances, circumstances beyond your control. A person who disengages because they've made an internal reasoned judgment that the goal has become unattainable, or that continuing to pursue it is no longer the right use of a finite life, doesn't fit that narrative cleanly. There's no socially sanctioned way to say, I looked at this honestly and chose to let it go, without the sentence being heard by others, and often by the person saying it, as a confession of failure, rather than what the research actually suggests it more often is, a difficult, adaptive act of self-regulation. This absence of a script is why the grief tends to get suppressed, rushed, or hidden rather than processed, without a recognized ritual or vocabulary for it. People tend to either perform a brittle, too quick acceptance, pretending the dream never mattered that much anyway, or they get stuck in a prolonged, unproductive loop of second-guessing the decision itself, which research on goal adjustment distinguishes from healthy disengagement and associates instead with rumination-based stagnation, revisiting the choice repeatedly without either recommitting to the goal or genuinely releasing it, caught in an unresolved middle state that carries real psychological cost of its own. What actually helps? Given the research, what this suggests is not a technique for making the grief disappear faster, but a more accurate way of moving through it. First, naming the loss honestly as a loss, specifically of the imagined future self connected to the goal, rather than minimizing it as merely changing plans. Second, recognizing that the disengagement and the reengagement are, per Wrosch and Scheier's findings, genuinely two separate tasks, and that the second one, finding something new and meaningful to redirect that same energy toward, is not a betrayal of the grief or a rush past it, but the other half of the actual mechanism that makes letting go sustainable rather than simply hollow. And third, understanding that the difficulty of this specific process is not evidence you're doing it wrong, it's evidence of what the goal actually was, a real structurally significant part of your imagined identity. And letting go of something that's significant was never going to be simple. So if you're in the middle of this right now, if there's a version of you, still vivid, still half alive in your imagination, who did the thing you've decided to stop pursuing? The grief you're feeling for that version of yourself is not a sign that you made the wrong call. It's the specific, appropriate weight of losing someone you spent years getting to know, someone who was, for a long time, the person you were quietly becoming. You're allowed to grieve them properly, and you're allowed, once you have, to become someone else instead.